Hello there guys, my name's Unstable Voltage and welcome to my new Europa Universalis 4 tutorial series. I've done a series like this before, but it was a little while ago now, and it was before a lot of the more recent DLCs and expansions. And since the Steam sale and the release of the most recent expansion, Common Sense, a lot of people have been joining the EU franchise, and I appreciate that it is a very difficult game to get started with. So I thought I'd put together this series that covers the basics of the game and specifically centres around the new expansion, Common Sense, which was released in June of 2015. Now, it's very difficult to know where to start with a series like this. In fact, I've tried to record it several times before, and I've spent 40 to 50 minutes on one video just talking about the interface. So what I'm going to attempt to do is break this series down into small segmented videos. You may find that some of these videos contain little to no gameplay. I'm aiming this series at people who are completely new to the EU franchise, but assuming that you have a little bit of experience with strategy games somewhere along the way. If you're more interested in the gameplay itself, I do have a complete EU4 playthrough as France on my channel, which was after the Art of War expansion, so before Common Sense, but I'm also currently working on a playthrough as England using the Common Sense expansion. If you want a lot more in-depth explanation of some of the mechanics, I suggest checking out channels such as Quill18 or Arumba, because they do some really good stuff on EU4, but this is going to be my beginner series. So in this first video, I'm just going to talk about the concepts of the game and what it is. Europa Universalis by Paradox Interactive is the fourth game in a series based on a European board game. And it has become much more complex over time. The mechanics are very in-depth because why not? You've got a computer that can do all the calculations for you. It's very much a game that has a lot of numerical modifiers. A lot of these things are expressed on tooltips to make it easy for the player, but there's a lot of complexity in the way that numbers are applied to various factors within the game that changes the way things work. So the main aim of EU4 is you pick a nation, and you play as that nation, and it is your job to lead your nation to greatness. Now, the game doesn't actually have any victory conditions. It's not like something like Civilization 5, where if you wipe out all your enemies, or you build a spaceship, or you do a certain thing, the game ends. That's not how EU4 works. There is an in-game score system that keeps track of the score for each nation, and you can try and just be the most powerful nation in terms of score by the time the game reaches its end timer, but there is no specific victory condition, so you do have to kind of set your own goals within the game. That said, there are certain countries that do have some national decisions they can take, which are a little bit like a goal, but again, it won't end the game. If you're playing as Castile, for example, you will have an option to try and form Spain. If you're playing as England, you will have an option to try and form Great Britain. Most countries in the Holy Roman Empire have the option to try and form Germany, so there are goals that you can work towards as well as setting your own. Now, EU4 is what I like to call a hybrid 4X game, or a hybrid grand strategy. Hybrid in the fact that it isn't really turn-based, but it isn't really real-time either. So the game takes place between the 11th of November 1444 and runs up to the 2nd of January 1821. So it runs through that period in history. Now, each day within the game is one turn, or as EU players call them, one tick. So if you work out those dates, it's actually 137,383 days. So you've basically got 137,383 turns. Now, when the game is unpaused, each day passes automatically once every couple of seconds. You can pause the game at any time you want to issue orders or to examine things on the map, and you can also change the speed of the game to make time pass faster. So I'm going to just go through some of the options just for getting started. First of all, one of the things that I'd recommend everyone does, this is the first screen that you'll see when you load the game in, go into the options menu and change your autosave interval. I think by default it is on yearly. The game is relatively stable, but sometimes it can crash, and there's nothing worse than losing a year's worth of in-game progress. So you might want to put your autosave interval onto at least half a year, or if you want to put it up more often, you can put it up to monthly if you wish. Probably a little bit too much, because when the game saves, it does pause slightly for a few seconds, which can be annoying if it does it too often. So I would definitely recommend putting it on half a year at least. The saves can become quite large. They can be a good sort of 40-50 megabytes each, so you might want to compress them if you're going to save a lot of them. And you can also auto-save to the cloud if you play the game from multiple machines. So I'd set that to half a year. I'd also recommend playing through the tutorials. There are a number of tutorials on here that you can play through, some basics, some advanced, and then there is a Spanish campaign. So I'd certainly recommend playing through all of those. They do miss quite a lot of stuff out. Now, everything in these videos is going to be talking about single player. There is multiplayer in this game, but I certainly wouldn't recommend it for a beginner, mainly because of the way that the passage of time works in this game, and it's very, very difficult when you've got multiple players who are all wanting to pause at the same time and everyone wants to play at a different speed. It just makes things a little bit difficult. So I'm going to be talking about the single player specifically here. One final thing to mention, as you can see, the single player and multiplayer buttons are both available. Unless they've fixed it, which I doubt they have, if you click one of those options like we have here and gone into single player and then go back, and if it's done it the way that it has been doing it recently, the multiplayer button will be greyed out, which means if you want to then go in and play a multiplayer game, you will have to restart the game. It's taking quite a few seconds. It's not the fastest game to load in the world. And I just want to check and see if that is still an issue. Yep, and as expected, I just cut that out because it took quite a few seconds to go back to the main menu, but the multiplayer button is greyed out and it says we must restart. So that's a little bit of a silly thing. So we're going to go into single player. And the first thing that you'll notice here is the map changes, and you see all of these different nations in different colours. You've got some buttons along the top here that you can use to toggle between various different map types. So these buttons are all mapped by default to the top row of letter keys on your keyboard. So assuming you're using a QWERTY keyboard, you've got Q, W, E, R, T, and these show various different things. The one that you're going to use most often in this game is the little blue flag there, which is a default W, and that's the political map mode, because that actually shows you the individual nations, which is who you might want to play as. Up here on the left hand side you have a list of dates. This is your historical start. So even though the game starts from the 11th of November 1444, you might want to start at a later period in history if you want to take part in a specific historical event. Bear in mind, of course, the later you start, the shorter game you are going to have. You can also actually fiddle with the date down here, and you can actually choose a specific start date if you wish. As you can see, I have all of the DLC expansions installed. Conquest of Paradise, Wealth of Nations, Res Publica, The Art of War, El Dorado and Common Sense. They are the current 6 DLC expansions. Also here you've got the tab for your saved games, and if you ever want to delete one of these, you can do so by right clicking on it and it gives you the option to delete that save game. So a few other options that we're going to have down here that I'll just tell you guys about. First of all, you have Iron Man mode. If you have Iron Man mode, it limits you to 1 save, so you can't sort of save, scum and reload if things go wrong. It also stops you from being able to cheat and switch countries, so on and so forth. If you actually want to be able to achieve the Steam achievements in this game, they only work in Iron Man mode. You don't get them if you are playing in non-Iron Man. You've also got a random new world button. This is if you have the Conquest of Paradise expansion. If you click the random new world button, then when you start the game, the American continents will be scrambled around. They will actually have all of their provinces put in different places, and the actual layout of the land will be completely different as well. So as the Americas start off in the fog of war and you have to discover them, especially if you're playing as a European power, it makes it a little bit more interesting because you won't necessarily know where everything is going to be. So those are the 2 options down there. You will also find, if you have the El Dorado expansion, you have these 2 buttons down here on the right hand side. You have Custom Nation. Custom Nation basically allows you to create your own nation. You can give it a name, you can choose what its abilities are, what its starting ideas are, and what sort of ideas it can take. And it basically works on a point distribution system. So you can choose how much land you take, you can choose which land you take, and taking stronger land is going to cost you more points. It's not something I'm going to go into in this series, but that's what the option does. And Random Nation, of course, allows you to pick a completely random nation. Some more options down here in the bottom left hand corner. Mostly the way you want to have this set up is as I have here. So bonuses determines whether or not we give bonuses to the player or to the AI. Now I've got bonuses turned off, which means everything is relatively standard, but if you mouse over you can actually see the bonuses that would be given to the AI or the player if you had that turned on. I'm not going to go through what all of those things do now. If you want to pause it and have a look, you can see. No point me trying to explain to you what all of those modifiers do until you understand the game a little bit more. You can also choose the AI difficulty, and as it actually says here, on easy the AI player is at a reduced skill and it reacts less harshly to player aggression and vulnerability. So it means the AI goes easy on you. If you have the AI on normal, the AI plays at its full skill level and it treats the player the same as it would with the AI nations, because obviously not only is the AI fighting against you, the player, it's also fighting against the other AI nations. And if you play on hard, the AI becomes at its full skill level and it actually reacts more harshly to the player. So the AI tends to go after you instead of going after the other AIs. You've also got this Lucky Nations thing here. And as someone pointed out in my previous tutorial, I actually explained this wrong. There are certain nations within the game that are considered lucky nations. I think there's about 10 or so at present. If you actually play with the lucky nations turned on, then the lucky nations will get the following bonuses that you see on the bottom of the tooltip there. Now, if you are playing as one of the lucky nations, you don't get the bonuses, so it's only the AI that gets the lucky nation bonuses. Leaving it on historical means that those historical nations, the ones that are listed, you can find them on the wiki, like Castile and the Ottomans and the French, they will actually get those lucky nations bonuses. If you actually change this to random, then it will be random nations that get those bonuses. The rest of the things down here you don't really need to worry about, they are just left on the standard settings. So whenever you pick a bookmark from the left-hand side over here, it will give you a list of these little shields at the bottom. And these are basically saying, these are interesting countries to play as at this period in history. So if we go back to the very start of the game, the default bookmark, which is the Rise of the Ottomans, it actually gives you a lot of choice here. The first one it's recommending is the Ottomans. It also recommends Castile, Portugal, France, England, Austria. There's a lot there to choose from, and it varies greatly depending on who you play. You can actually go ahead and play any one you want. Any single one of these nations that you can see, you can play as. I would advise against playing as one of the Native American tribes, especially for new players, because you'll actually find that they are very, very difficult. I'd also advise against playing as some of the African tribes and some of the Asian nations, because again, they can be quite difficult for new players. I would certainly recommend sticking to Europe. One of the easiest ones to get started with is definitely Castile, which is why it is included in the tutorial campaign, mainly because Castile has very few neighbours that can cause it a problem. They are neighboured with France, but they have a very small border. Aragon is often an enemy to Castile, but they're not too large and too aggressive, and Castile can usually deal with them. Portugal's usually friendly, Castile can usually get friendly with England, and Castile start with a good navy. So they're relatively isolated, and they don't really have many land routes of attack. So Castile can be a very, very good country to start with. Also, some other countries such as Muscovy. Muscovy start off quite strong, and because they're landlocked, you don't have to worry about things such as navies and naval trade. Another good one to start off is France. France is known by everyone who plays EU4 as the Big Blue Blob. They have incredibly strong military. They're a very, very strong country to start with, and all they seem to do is expand. There is a little bit of risk in playing as France because they pretty much end up constantly at war with Burgundy, which is the dark red colour here. They also end up at war with England a lot, who start the game with some controlled territory right next to France. And of course they also start next to the Holy Roman Empire. So there's a very, very good chance if you play as France, even though they are biggerful and more powerful, you may end up in a lot more fights against big, powerful enemies. So I'd recommend somebody like Castile to get started. One thing I will say is expect to lose your first handful of games. Treat your first handful of games as an experiment, a way to get into the game, learn the game, and learn the mechanics. So let's go ahead and click on one or two of these nations. If we go ahead here and click on France, we'll actually get some information up here on the right-hand side of the screen. And that tells us a little bit about the nation that we currently have selected. Shows us our flag. it tells us what our religion is. Now, I'm not going to go too much into religion on this video, we'll cover that later on, but there is a religious map mode button here. The shortcut is E. If we press that, you can actually see all of the different religions of the world. So you've got the animist tribes of America and parts of Africa. You've got the Sunni religions, you've got the Hindu, you've got the Buddhist religions, you've also got the Christian religions in there as well. And these do change over time. For example, all you can see here in the Christian region is Catholic and Orthodox. You can't actually see any Reformed or Protestant because they pop up later. Religion does have certain impacts on the game, but as I said, we'll talk about that in another video. You can also see here that we are in the Western tech group. So depending on which tech group you play as is going to make a lot of difference to how fast you progress in the game with certain technologies and how strong you are. The Western tech group is the strongest tech group in the game. Pretty much everybody in Western Europe is in the Western tech group. Anyone who isn't in the Western tech group can go through certain processes to westernize, but that is something that happens later in the game. So if we click on Lithuania, for example, we can see that Lithuania is in the Eastern tech group. If we go and click on, let's click on Ming, for example, we can see that Ming is in the Chinese tech group. If we go down to one of the African tribes, for example, we can see that they are in the Indian tech group. Some of them will be in the sub-Saharan tech group, and of course we can go all the way over to the Americas here, and if we click on these we can see that they are in the North American, and there's various different tribal South American tech groups as well. So you want to make sure, certainly for your first games, that you are playing one of the nations that is in the Western tech group. You will see what type of nation you are, whether you're an independent nation. Some nations actually start by being controlled by another. So if we take Nevers, for example, here, Nevers is a duchy and they are a vassal of Burgundy. So it means that they are actually, Burgundy is Nevers' overlord. Whereas if you play as France, France is a kingdom and it's an independent nation. It doesn't have an overlord. And again, that's something we'll talk more about as we go on. You can also see the skill of the current leader. Now, there are three main sources that you have in this game, one of which is the monarch points. And your monarch points come in three varieties: admin skill, diplomatic skill, and military skill. And a leader can have anywhere from 0 to 6 points in each of these skills. Now, obviously, your leaders do get replaced over time because they die and their heirs take the throne. So you might find that your next leader has a better score or your next leader has a worse score. But as you can see, France actually starts with a 4-2-4 leader, which is actually quite strong. You compare that to some places that might have, like here, we've got a 2-1-2. So France again starts with a very, very good leader. You can also see what level you start off in the different tech groups. I think technologies go up to about level 28. Most of the countries in Europe will start at level 3 on everything. There might be the odd one or two that is lagging slightly behind, but you tend to find that they are other nations outside of the Western tech group. Particularly the North American tech groups always seem to start behind everybody else. You also have a list of ideas here. You can see with the French selected, we have the French ideas. So the French traditions, they get increased national manpower and increased diplomatic relations. And for completing all of their ideas, they get a plus 5% discipline. Now, again, ideas aren't going to make any sense to you at the moment, so there's no point in me talking about them really. But you can actually mouse over them and it'll pretty much tell you what each of these things do. And these are bonuses that you can unlock for the nation that you're playing as. You'll also see a little bit of information here about the country size, so the number of provinces that you own. Each province is basically one of these little individual areas on the map with a border. So you can see how many provinces you own. You can see your development, which is again a total that we will talk about in another video. And you can see how many forts you have in total. And again, forts are something very, very important. And then right down at the bottom, you will actually see any current diplomacy statuses you have with any other nations. So France starts off guaranteeing the independence of Scotland, which basically means France will come to Scotland's aid if anybody tries to take them over. You'll also find some countries like Burgundy, for example, have a lot more. Burgundy are leading a personal union with Brabant, Flanders and Holland, which basically means they have the same dynasty on the throne and they're all sort of married into the same royal family, which eventually means that Burgundy could integrate those countries into itself. It's also leading the vassal of Nevers, because we clicked on Nevers earlier and we saw that Nevers is a vassal of Burgundy, and we can see that Burgundy has the following vassal, Nevers, which basically means that Nevers is just the underling. Burgundy is the overlord of Nevers, as we spoke about before. So that's basically how you find all the information about the different nations. As I said, I definitely recommend playing as somebody like Castile, France, or Muscovy to get started. They're probably the best people to play as. When we come back to the next video, we will actually be starting a game and going through what you need to do to get your first game up and running and off the ground. But until then, thanks a lot for watching, guys. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. Until then, goodbye for now.